This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. It was Jimmy Carter who made the Iowa caucuses important, and now, 40 years later, one of his aides, Richard Moe, reflects on Carter's legacy. Scholar Elaine Kamarck reflects on how people are now getting their political news. And a new book by an ex-Republican hatchet man says the Bush family is a criminal enterprise. Bill Press talks with the author, Roger Stone. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. The Iowa primary is now all-important in presidential politics, and Jimmy Carter made it that way. Former aide Richard Moe says the 39th president is finally getting the praise he deserves. And we say hello to Richard Moe, who served as chief of staff to Vice President Walter Mondale and as a senior advisor to President Jimmy Carter. From 1993 to 2010, he was president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And his latest book, Roosevelt's Second Act, tells the story of how FDR decided to run for an unprecedented third term as war was breaking out in Europe. Richard Moe, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And nice to speak with you again as well. Of course, congratulations, I guess, is in order on the second book, Roosevelt's Second Act. But we would like to take some time and talk to you today about Jimmy Carter, who, as we mentioned, you obviously saw close up as the chief of staff to Vice President Mondale. Do you feel that President Carter gets a raw deal from historians and the public, even still these days?
Well, I think whether he's gotten a raw deal or not is irrelevant because he's now getting, I think, a full assessment from serious historians about his presidency. There are 4 biographies in the works. President Carter told me this when I saw him recently, and he's spending time with all of them. And the theme, if it can be called that connects a lot of these biographies that are in the works, is that while he's been well applauded for his post-presidency, it's his presidency that really stands out for the very courageous decisions he's made and the very consequential decisions he's made. Maybe we can get into some of those issues today because they are huge and they've been largely unrecognized by the American public as well as many historians. So I think he's in the process of getting his just due from historians and others.
What did the Carter-Mondale administration get right that it doesn't get credit for?
Well, a number of things. One of the things that I think it has been recognized for is the fact that he brought the only Middle East peace treaty to the Middle East, in our lifetime, and it's still intact between Israel and Egypt. And that's been the subject of a play, of a best-selling book, and it'll be a documentary film. So I think what he did in the Middle East just stands huge out there because no other president has done it. One of the other issues he hasn't gotten full credit for is the Panama Canal. It was highly controversial at the time. People thought we stole it fair and square. It was ours, and it was the vestige of our colonialism in this hemisphere. But it was an enormously important symbol to the rest of Latin America that they resented this. And the fact is that at great political cost, President Carter took this issue on. When I interviewed him a few weeks ago, he said this was the toughest issue he had to deal with in his lifetime, including his election to the presidency. We lost, I don't know how many Democratic Senate seats on this, and it contributed to his loss in 1980. But this has been a success in so many ways. It's a success in terms of financial stability, in terms of security, in terms of the Panamanians are building a new canal. The Panamanians are running this better than we ever did because they have a stake in it. It's on their territory. Mm-hmm. And they're doing a really good job. And so I think, and what President Carter says is the greatest benefit of it is that it removed this barrier to dealing effectively with the rest of Latin America. So it became a huge human rights issue. After the Panama Canal Treaty, the dictatorship started falling, and democracy kept appearing, almost exponentially from country to country in South America. It changed the nature of the conversation down there, and human rights is one of President Carter's greatest legacies. There are other things that he did. For example, at the end of his administration, he used his executive powers under the Antiquities Act and working with the Congress basically to save part of Alaska from rampant development. He saved a part of Alaska the size of California, if you can believe that.
Wow.
That otherwise would have been torn up and developed. And this is one of our most precious resources. And some of it, of course, should be developed, but it's got to be done carefully.
Mm-hmm.
So he was one of the great conservation presidents of the 20th century. So that was another thing he did. He appointed Paul Volcker to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Volcker served up some very tough medicine in terms of raising interest rates, but it drove down inflation, which was one of the chief culprits of the 70s. And inflation has remained under control, has not been a significant issue for 35 years. So those are just some of the issues that Jimmy Carter dealt with effectively that I think he deserves great credit for.
Well, certainly one of the other landmarks of that administration was the elevation of the vice president to a more important role in policymaking. How did Vice President Mondale, your boss, approach the relationship? Presumably not like Dick Cheney.
No, it was the antithesis of Dick Cheney. But I asked President Carter, I said, when did you first start thinking about the vice presidency and what it should be? He said when he was a naval officer, President Truman was president, and Jimmy Carter learned that President Truman did not know about the existence of the atomic bomb. He said that is just totally unacceptable. So he decided that when and if he became a presidential nominee and a president, he was going to try to make the vice presidency a part of the executive branch of the government instead of part of the legislative branch, which is basically where the Constitution left it. The vice presidency is basically a constitutional afterthought. Mm-hmm. So Vice President Mondale saw it the same way, and they sat down and had a number of conversations and decided that the vice president should be the chief across-the-board advisor to the president. In order to serve that role, he had to have complete access to the president and to the information in the White House information flow. And President Carter guaranteed those things, and Vice President Mondale was invited to sit in on every meeting that the president had. He didn't do that, of course, in every case. But they worked very, very compatibly and very closely in the formulation and the execution of national policy during those 4 years. And that has become the model. It's become known as the modern vice presidency. And every president and vice president subsequently has used some variation of that model to structure their own relationship between the two offices. So it's in effect a permanent relationship, even though the Constitution has not been changed.
We're speaking with Richard Moe, former Chief of Staff to Vice President Walter Mondale and a senior advisor to President Jimmy Carter. Dick, were there differences between the two, or even major, minor differences on any policy issues?
Well, from time to time there would be differences, but they would always work them out quietly. They never surfaced publicly. And one of the things that facilitated that was that Vice President Mondale had a personal lunch with President Carter, just the two of them, every Monday morning, or every Monday noon, I should say, when they were both in Washington. And we would work up agendas for this, and Vice President Mondale would scratch them out and put his own items on there, and he would go in there, and they would let their hair down, both of them, and this is where Vice President Mondale would tell them, here's where I think we can do better, Mr. President. Here's what I think on this issue and on that issue. And they just hammered things out, and the president appreciated that. And those conversations remained inviolable. And there was never a leak out of there. He never tried to posture himself as some administration people tend to do. But that really cemented the relationship, and it made it work as they had planned to make it work. So sure, there are inevitably disagreements along the way, but there are not serious policy disagreements here.
Carter was the first president to explicitly run as an outsider, but Walter Mondale was really the consummate Washington insider. Did President Carter's antipathy to Congress make it impossible for him to succeed?
No. You're right that I think one of the reasons Governor Carter picked Senator Mondale was that he did know Washington and he knew the Congress, and of course Carter has not spent time in Washington. So that was a complementary skill and experience that could serve the administration. It was compatible with the new arrangement that they were settling for themselves. One of the misperceptions about President Carter, he didn't dislike Congress at all, and he spent a lot of time with members of Congress. Some people went back and totaled up the hours that he spent, and then looked at the record. And President Carter has a very impressive record of accomplishment with the Congress, much more so than recent presidents. Didn't get everything, and there were clearly some differences from time to time. But on the whole, it was a healthy relationship, give and take, and it turned out to be really productive. And Vice President Mondale played a big role in that because he spent a lot of time on the Hill advocating for the president's policies.
Now, Walter Mondale, of course, lost the 1984 presidential race. Was this inevitable given Reagan's popularity, or did his promise, Walter Mondale, his promise to be honest about raising taxes, did that doom him?
Well, it didn't help.
Fair to say.
Whether Reagan's election was inevitable, you can make a good case for that because the country was coming out of a deep recession, and what matters in these elections, and we're seeing some of it almost every presidential year, it's the trend. In this case, it was the trend of the economy coming out of the recession, which benefited Reagan enormously. And he capitalized on that by running a campaign that basically said it's morning in America. I remember the gauzy TV ads that they ran with the sun coming up. It's morning in America. Well, they wanted everybody to feel good, and people did feel better. And so it was very difficult to kind of penetrate that and talk about the more serious issues that the country was facing. So it probably just wasn't in the cards.
Do you think President Carter's standing might improve as time goes on?
I have absolutely no doubt about it. The thing is, people say, well, he's been the best former president we've ever had. That's true, and he's a model for former presidents in terms of what he's doing. What he's doing to eradicate disease in Africa and bring democracy and fair elections to some of these countries and resolve civil wars. It's just extraordinary. But some of these things that I've talked about that he's accomplished as president, I think once they're put out in serious biographies by serious objective historians and others, I think it's going to revise significantly the opinion of President Carter's presidency, because I think it's going to be seen as very significant in the context of its time. It was kind of a transitional time for the country coming off of Watergate and Vietnam and into a whole series of other issues. But he tackled all. He established diplomatic relations with China, for example. That was huge. And he took a lot of flack for that. He took on a lot of really tough issues.
He did a lot of good things that he did take a lot of flack for, and in the end, he was right.
He was. That's exactly right. That's a good way to put it. But he didn't duck the tough ones. Mm-hmm. And there are presidents who duck tough issues, and that's understandable because you can handle just so much at one time on your plate. But he almost said, "Bring him on," and it was extraordinary. Yeah. And in most cases, he was successful. Mm-hmm. I remember when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Nobody expected that, So the president had to issue sanctions on the Soviet Union, cancel the Olympics, cancel American participation. Highly unpopular. And but he did those things because it was he believed very sincerely that it was in the national interest for the United States to make a statement at that point. Strong statement.
Yep, absolutely. And may his legacy continue to grow in a positive way. Richard Moe, former Chief of Staff to Vice President Walter Mondale, Senior Advisor to President Jimmy Carter. His latest book, Roosevelt's Second Act, tells the story of how FDR decided to run for an unprecedented third term as war was breaking out in Europe. Dick, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Okay, we'll talk to you later. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Longtime Democratic analyst Elaine Kamarck says Americans need to become as sophisticated consumers about the modern news media as they are about cars and refrigerators. We'll talk to her more about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
When I crossed paths with a Democratic campaign consultant in Austin last March, I suggested he come to the local IBEW hall to hear Bernie, adding that the Vermont senator was pondering a run for the presidency. "You gotta be kidding me," he snorted. "Bernie Sanders? Let me tell you, his chances are slim and none, and Slim don't live in Bernie's precinct. First of all, no one south of Greenwich Village ever heard of him. Second, who's going to vote for some old senator from a tiny state of Birkenstock wearers damn near in Canada?" So he was a no-show. But we didn't have room for him anyway. The hall would seat 200, but nearly 500 Texans showed up that night to hear the undiluted populist message of this senator, quote, no one ever heard of. Austin was one of the stops on a cross-country trip that Bernie was taking to assess whether an unabashedly progressive, movement-building presidential campaign could rally any substantial support. If he ran, he intended to go right at the moneyed elites who thoroughly corrupted our politics and rigged our economy to squeeze the life out of the middle class. But would anyone follow? He wasn't sure, and even if it might work, he assumed it would be a slow build. I was to introduce him at the Austin event, and as we worked our way from the parking lot, waving to the overflow group gathered outside, shaking hands with people standing in the hallway and stairwell, then squeezing through the jam-packed crowd in the auditorium, I said to him, "Something is happening here." He nodded and said in an astonished whisper, "Something is happening." This is Jim Hightower saying that surprisingly big night in Austin was a precursor to what would soon become the Sanders sensation, a people-powered movement that has already shattered the Democratic establishment's holy myth that corporate centrism and super PAC money are the only means to victory. By going straight to the people, Bernie is showing another way.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Elaine Kamarck of the Brookings Institution says the problem with getting your news from social media is that you simply choose what you want to see, not necessarily what you need to see. And we say hello to Elaine Kamarck. She is founding director of the Center for Effective Public Management and a senior fellow in the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution. Also, she is a public sector scholar with wide experience in government, academia, and politics. Elaine Kamarck, thanks very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, thanks for having me.
Always nice to speak with you. You know, you took a look recently at how younger Americans are getting their political news. Does their reliance on social media make them more engaged or less engaged in the political process?
It's an interesting question, and it's a little bit hard to tell. On the one hand, the ability to interact with each other, have conversations with your peers, whether it's tweeting or Facebooking or whatever, while things are going on, is actually probably indicates a higher degree of political engagement than previous generations. On the other hand, the problem with social media is that you get to pick what you want to read. You go to it. It doesn't come to you. So people can have their prejudices reinforced more easily than they could in an earlier day in America.
Are we really going to have good government if the younger generation is getting its news through comedy shows, or will it possibly be a spur for viewers to dig more deeply?
Again, we really don't know that yet. But I think that we shouldn't be too depressed about the situation. Two things seem to be happening. The first one is that even though newspaper readership is down, the number of news articles that fly around the internet from person to person, and especially on Facebook, is actually enormous. So people are seeing a lot of news, even though they don't sit down and read a newspaper the way their father or mother did. So I think that people are engaged and they are seeing things. The downside is that they are probably seeing only the things that they and their friends agree with and like, and that they are missing out on sort of contradictory points of view. And I think we see that already a little bit in the highly polarized and angry tone of the political conversation. If you only watch Fox, or if your friends only forward you emails from, American Spectator or, other, right of center publication, then you're only going to get one point of view about the world. And, there's going to be nothing to make you stop and think, well, is this really right or not?
Well, that's something that gets me, is that here's the other problem I have, too, whether it's coming from Fox or somebody even less reputable. You don't know if it's really news or if somebody's just making stuff up.
Well, that is a big, major problem on the internet. Now, more educated young people understand that something that is forwarded from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, etc., has probably been checked a little bit more thoroughly than something that comes to them from some blog that they never heard of.
Right.
And that process actually works both ways. On the one hand, a lot of nonsense gets thrown around on the internet. The most recent, of course, being, Trump's assertion that there were all these people cheering in Jersey City, New Jersey, when the Twin Towers came down on 9/11. I mean, nobody has corroborated that, but boy, he saw it on the internet, so he's determined that that's true.
And for a short time, Ben Carson even said he saw the video too.
Yeah. I mean, this is just crazy stuff that does happen in the internet day and age. Now, the hope is that just as Americans turned into very sophisticated consumers of cars and appliances and other things, that they will be turning into sophisticated consumers of news and look at the source of things that are coming to them on the internet.
We're speaking with Elaine Kamarck, founding director of the Center for Effective Public Management and senior fellow in the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution. Also, I want to mention the author of Primary Politics, Everything You Need to Know About How America Nominates Its Presidential Candidates. And this would be a good time of year for you to go and pick that up. You can get that at Amazon. Elaine, traditionally, news has been defined as an objective account of the who, what, when, where, why, and how of important events. Is hard news even relevant anymore?
Hard news is in danger, and it is in danger because the newspaper business, which is the primary collector of hard news, has been laying off reporters at an astonishing rate in the last decade. And so we have fewer and fewer people who are trained to go out and find the who, what, why, when, and where, and just give those facts to us uninterpreted and with no gloss on them. And so that is in trouble, and people are worried about that. Now, there are still newspapers collecting hard news, but the business model of newspapers in the internet age just has not solidified. They've all gone digital, but they're having trouble making money, and therefore they're having trouble paying reporters. The other thing that's disturbing, the other disturbing trend, is that a lot of yesterday's reporters are still working as journalists, but they're working in very specialized areas of the economy where what they're reporting on are things that are of interest to moneyed interests in certain sectors. And so those reporters are working behind very expensive paywalls. And they're not reporting to the general public. They're reporting to, the CEOs and the managers of companies, say in pharma or in energy or in any of the other large sectors of the economy. So there's still reporting going on, but it isn't reporting that's getting to the general public.
So we have a centralization of agendas by a few large media corporations? I mean, is that what that comes down to?
Well, it's hard to say because there still are the large media corporations are still collecting hard news. So you will consistently find, for instance, differences between the news reported on say, the Wall Street Journal and their editorial page slant on the news. You'll still find some of that, but what's really been crowded out is the actual collection of news. It's particularly dramatic at the state and local level, where it's very hard to find people watching state government and watching local government. And, it's going to be easier for people to get away with corruption and all sorts of stuff when you don't have the media acting as the watchdog.
So the traditional political and government reporters are now simply serving as conduits of information from one elite group to another and ignoring the information needs of the average American? I mean, how does journalism even survive that way? Well,
they're not. What's happening is they are being paid to be conduits, as you say, from one elite group to another. And fewer people are being paid to serve the watchdog interests of average Americans. And so it's a real problem of balance in the journalism industry. The industry survives, but it's surviving behind paywalls. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. So if you want to know what's really going on in pharma and the Food and Drug Administration, you can find that out. People are collecting that hard news, but they're asking you to pay sometimes thousands of dollars a year to see that hard news.
The other problem I have, and we actually had this discussion in studio earlier today, I'll be on a particular newspaper's website, and they'll ask me if I'm not, it's perhaps one that's out of town from where I am, and they're asking me either to pay for a subscription so I can look at their website, or I have to pay for the website. And I get a certain amount of views, for a month for free.
Uh-huh.
But these websites are horrible. they're old, they're archaic, they're not fast. So you're not going to keep a young person on that website. So they're digging themselves a deeper hole, it seems to me. And I'm talking about newspapers in particular.
Right. Yeah, no, newspapers, let's face it, they haven't made this transition easily. And a lot of them are now coming late to the game of trying to get people to pay for views, which they need to do in order to pay those reporters who would go out and collect hard news. But they haven't been very good at it, and we've got a whole younger generation that is accustomed to getting things on the Internet for free. I mean, let's face it, this is the generation that grew up getting free music. And, the artist said, wait a minute, we need to get paid for making music.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with news. I mean, you got to pay somebody. At the end of the day, the economy is real. And that's what, of course, everybody has forgotten in the digital age. And at the end of the day, there are real people, and they have to go out and they have to do a real job to get you real news. And if nobody's paying, it's pretty hard to do.
So perhaps, and maybe in answering this question, we can figure this out. Maybe there's a role for something else in journalism. So you've got this age of tweets and retweets and Facebook and Instagram and all these different social media platforms. So how are people supposed to know what's true and what isn't? Is there now the opportunity for somebody in the journalism world, real journalism world, to come out and say, have their own fact checker site and say, well, if you go there and you look at stuff, come over here and I'll tell you if it's right?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the one thing that has been blossoming, and it was started at SUNY Stony Brook, State University of New York Stony Brook, is called a news literacy program. And what it is a course that attempts to teach college students, and I think they're now getting down to high school students, which is where they should start, how to evaluate the veracity of news. So looking at sources and who are the sources, are they named, are they credible, really going in depth. That is probably one of the most effective ways to get people to understand how to look at the Internet. I think it's going to be hard to establish sort of one site for truth, although there are fact checkers in various, all over the Internet. But I think that at the high school level, we have to start educating people on news literacy so that people can have a little bit of skepticism about the claims that, are made by various, wacky things that show up on the Internet looking like news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a reporter back in the old days, you had to verify something 3 or 4 times before it went to print. So maybe we just need to teach kids to look at the Internet that way.
Yeah, look at the Internet that way and look at the stories themselves, ask who is, are these people who are making the critique or making the argument, are they real experts? Are they made up people? I mean, that's been happening too, people making up experts that in fact don't really exist. And it's easy enough on the Internet to sort of check that. Oh, who is, John Doe? Is John Doe a real professor of physics? Or is John Doe somebody that, the author here made up and who once took a physics class in community college,
darn,
that's
you found
the sort of
me
thing
out.
we have to teach kids to learn.
Right. Elaine Kamarck,
Right.
founding director of the Center for Effective Public Management and senior fellow in the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. You can check out her new book, Primary Politics, Everything You Need to Know About How America Nominates Its Presidential Candidates. A good read, especially this time of year. You can find that on Amazon. Elaine, thank you so much for your time with us today. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Well, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect Stand Up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with author Roger Stone, who makes provocative charges about the Bush family.
The veteran political consultant Roger Stone out with a new book, Jeb and the Bush Crime Family, the Inside Story of an American Dynasty. Roger joins us on our news line this morning. Hey, Roger, it's been a while. Good to talk to you.
Good morning, Bill. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing?
Terrific. Never better.
All right. Well, got to get your latest on the war between Donald Trump and Fox News. But, well, let's set that aside for a second. Tell us about this book, The Bush Crime Family. Which of the many Bushes are you talking about? Or all of them?
I'm talking about all of them. Prescott Bush, the patriarch of the Bush family, senator from Connecticut. He makes his money arming the Nazis. He owns a steel mill that uses slave labor from Auschwitz. His bank is actually seized by the U.S. government for treasonous activity in 1938. Then, of course, there's George H.W. Bush. In Iran-Contra, he refuses to be questioned or to turn over any documents, and that's how he avoids indictment. I also focus on the Reagan assassination and the many strange connections of the Hinckleys to the Bushes. And then, of course, there's Jeb. Now, he's not doing great in the polls, but I'm taking no chances. I take a look at his business career in Miami, his shady business dealings, his past as a drug dealer, his own drug use, which is hypocritical because he's such a drug warrior.
Drug dealer, Jeb Bush?
Yes. At Andover when he's in boarding school, in college, and then later in both Houston and Miami. I make a case that Jeb has been involved in dealing drugs.
That's the squarest drug dealer I've ever heard of in my life.
Yeah, no, look, the guy was perpetually stoned, according to his classmates that I interviewed, and it's the hypocrisy. It's what I call elite deviance. There are certain people in the country so wealthy, so connected, so powerful that the laws don't apply to them, and I think the Bushes meet this category.
Did you deliberately or just forget to mention W?
Oh, believe me, he's in there. It's just that his crimes are so well known, talking us into a phony war, for example. So, look, I've just, as you probably know, I have written a book on the Clintons' war on women. I've now written a book on the Bushes. These are bookends. It should be called the Bush-Clinton Crime Syndicate because we talk a lot about their phony and fraudulent charitable activities. For example, their Haitian Relief Fund raises $138 million, spends $10 million. Somebody pocketed $128 million. It's all in the book.
On the Bush family, you got actions and projects or whatever, or issues or policy that you don't like is one thing. But you go beyond that, Roger. I mean, you're saying actually these are crimes for which they should have been indicted, should it be locked away for? Actual crimes, right?
Yes, I read John Meacham's biography of George H.W. Bush. Bill, it's a whitewash. It's as if Iran-Contra never happened. It's as if the U.S. government was not trafficking both narcotics and weapons in order to illegally raise money for the Iran-Contra after the Bolin Amendment, after Congress shut down aid for the Nicaraguan rebels. It's just airbrushed out of history like it never happened. It's one of the reasons I wrote this book.
Well, that was Ronald Reagan's trafficking in drugs, right?
Yes,
in arms to help the Contras, right?
Yes, and the head of the task force, really pulled together by Bill Casey, is none other than Vice President George Bush. This is why when the drug smuggler Barry Seal, who's deeply involved in Iran-Contra, is murdered, George Bush's phone number is found in a piece of paper wadded up in his wallet. The new TV series, by the way, Narco, actually covers this.
Roger Stone is our guest. Roger Stone's new book, Jeb and the Bush Crime Family. It's just out, the inside story of an American dynasty. As he says, it's a bookend. You are, I guess, an equal opportunity critic or offender, right, against both the I was going to say, it's a strange book for a Republican to write, this one. Have you gotten a lot of criticism from your Republican friends?
Well, some. I mean, the point, of course, is the Bushes aren't conservatives. They're crony capitalists. They believe in nothing whatsoever. So it's not a strange book for a conservative Republican to write. Now, the truth is, Bill, I'm not a Republican anymore. I finally came around to the view that the two-party duopoly is kind of all in it together. So I joined the Libertarian Party and voted against Mitt Romney just because I couldn't stomach it. I might, like Teddy Roosevelt, like Ron Paul, I might come back to the Republican Party someday. But for the time being, both parties, in my view, have kind of morphed into the same party.
So
it's a party of endless war, erosion of civil liberties, massive debt, and so on.
So does that mean you are one of the people encouraging Michael Bloomberg to run?
No, I'm for Donald because we've been friends for 37 years, and he's unique to say the least, and we have some disagreements. But the great asset there, frankly, is his financial independence. The idea that you actually have a president who is not beholden to any special interests, not to the lobbyists, not to the moneyed interests. He's his own man, very much his own man, very much doing it his way. I left his campaign in August because, frankly, he doesn't need a strategist. He is his own strategist. And you can't argue with it. I mean, look at his poll numbers. Look at where he is in the race. So he's done it his way, and he's done an incredible job.
Well, yeah, when you guys sort of had your little breakup in August, I know you've been friends and some maybe and some professional capacity for a while. I really thought you would come back, you know what I mean? But you haven't. But you still stay in touch with him on the campaign trail?
I actually think I've been more effective on his behalf from the outside than I ever could have been on the inside, because I've obviously spoken very extensively about why I support him.
Yeah.
And we talk from time to time. But as I said, he's doing it his way. I'm merely a supporter at this juncture.
Right,
would I go back in? I don't anticipate being asked. If I did, I'd do whatever he wanted me to do to become president, of course.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Richard Moe, Elaine Kamarck, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up